Question 1. Strategic planning requires a Missouri Concealed Carry Permit (CCP) holder to understand the full scope of their rights and responsibilities. Considering Missouri Revised Statutes Chapter 571, which of the following actions best demonstrates a responsible and legally compliant approach to carrying a concealed firearm? Option A. Assuming that a valid CCP allows carrying a concealed firearm in any location not explicitly marked with a "No Guns Allowed" sign. Option B. Actively researching and memorizing the specific locations prohibited by Missouri law for concealed carry and ensuring adherence to these restrictions. Option C. Believing that the CCP itself grants an unrestricted right to carry a concealed firearm in all public spaces within Missouri. Option D. Relying on personal interpretations of firearm carry laws or advice from acquaintances regarding permissible locations. Correct answer is B. Actively researching and memorizing the specific locations prohibited by Missouri law for concealed carry and ensuring adherence to these restrictions. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed firearm in Missouri. Misinterpreting or disregarding these obligations can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of a concealed carry permit (CCP). The core challenge lies in understanding the nuances of Missouri law regarding the permissible locations for carrying a concealed firearm and the specific prohibitions that apply, even when possessing a valid CCP. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 571, specifically concerning the locations where a concealed firearm may not be carried. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and public safety by recognizing that a CCP does not grant an unrestricted right to carry a firearm in all public spaces. Missouri law explicitly prohibits carrying a concealed firearm in certain locations, such as schools, courthouses, and polling places on election days, regardless of CCP status. A responsible permit holder must actively inform themselves of these restrictions and ensure their actions align with these legal boundaries. This proactive commitment to understanding and following the law is the cornerstone of responsible firearm ownership and concealed carry. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that a valid Missouri CCP automatically permits carrying a concealed firearm in any location. This assumption is a direct violation of Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 571, which clearly delineates prohibited areas. The legal framework does not grant blanket permission. Rather, it outlines specific exceptions and prohibitions. Another incorrect approach is to rely on informal advice or assumptions from other individuals about where it is permissible to carry. This bypasses the official legal guidance provided by the state and can lead to unintentional violations. Legal compliance requires consulting the actual statutes and regulations, not hearsay. A further incorrect approach is to believe that if a location does not have explicit signage prohibiting firearms, then carrying is permitted. While signage can serve as a reminder, the absence of a sign does not negate the statutory prohibitions outlined in Missouri law. The legal restrictions are in effect regardless of whether they are posted. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal knowledge and proactive compliance. This involves 1. Familiarizing oneself with the entirety of Missouri Revised Statutes Chapter 571, paying close attention to prohibited locations. 2. Regularly reviewing updates to these laws, as regulations can change. 3. Consulting official state resources or legal counsel if there is any ambiguity regarding carrying in a specific location. 4. Exercising sound judgment and erring on the side of caution if unsure about the legality of carrying in a particular place. Question 2. Market research demonstrates that applicants for a Missouri Concealed Carry Permit (CCP) may disclose past legal issues. When an applicant for a Missouri CCP discloses a past misdemeanor conviction for petty theft, what is the most appropriate course of action for the issuing authority? Option A. Immediately deny the application upon learning of any misdemeanor conviction, regardless of its nature or classification. Option B. Review the specific nature of the petty theft misdemeanor conviction and compare it against the disqualifying offenses listed in Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 571, to determine eligibility. Option C. Conduct informal inquiries with local law enforcement to gather opinions on the applicant's character before making a decision. Option D. Approve the concealed carry permit application without further investigation. Assuming a misdemeanor conviction does not automatically disqualify an applicant. The correct answer is B. Review the specific nature of the petty theft misdemeanor conviction and compare it against the disqualifying offenses listed in Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 571, to determine eligibility. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the applicant's right to privacy and the need for thoroughness in the concealed carry permit application process. The applicant's disclosure of a past misdemeanor conviction, while seemingly minor, necessitates careful consideration under Missouri law to determine its impact on eligibility. The challenge lies in interpreting the nuances of Missouri's concealed carry statutes and ensuring a fair and legally compliant decision is made without undue prejudice. The best approach involves a direct and thorough review of the applicant's disclosed misdemeanor conviction against the specific disqualifying criteria outlined in Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 571, particularly concerning offenses that would prevent the issuance of a concealed carry permit. This approach is correct because it adheres strictly to the legal framework established by Missouri law. Section 571, 101 RSMO, outlines the grounds for denial, and a direct comparison of the applicant's conviction to these grounds ensures a legally sound and objective decision. This method prioritizes regulatory compliance and due process for the applicant. An approach that dismisses the application solely based on the mention of any misdemeanor, without further investigation into the nature of the offense and its classification under Missouri law, is incorrect. This fails to acknowledge that not all misdemeanors automatically disqualify an applicant. It also violates the principle of individualized assessment required by the statute. Another incorrect approach would be to approve the permit without verifying the nature of the misdemeanor and its relevance to the disqualifying offenses listed in Section 571, 101 RSMO. This bypasses the statutory requirement for a comprehensive review and could lead to the issuance of a permit to an individual who legally should not possess one, thereby compromising public safety and violating the spirit and letter of Missouri's concealed carry laws. Finally, an approach that relies on hearsay or informal inquiries about the applicant's past, rather than a direct review of official records and the applicant's disclosure against statutory criteria, is professionally unsound. This introduces subjectivity and potential bias, undermining the integrity of the permit process and failing to meet the legal standard for eligibility determination. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the relevant statutes. Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 571. This involves meticulously reviewing all submitted documentation, comparing disclosed information against specific legal disqualifiers, and seeking clarification or additional documentation only when necessary and legally permissible. The focus must always be on objective, legally defined criteria. Question 3. Market research demonstrates that applicants for a Missouri Concealed Carry Permit, CCP, may have past interactions with law enforcement that did not result in a conviction. If a sheriff reviews an application from an individual who was arrested for assault but the charges were later dismissed, what is the most appropriate course of action when determining permit eligibility? Option A. Automatically deny the permit application due to the arrest, as any interaction involving an assault charge warrants a presumption of unsuitability for carrying a concealed firearm. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the circumstances surrounding the arrest, considering any available evidence or information that might indicate a propensity for violence or poor judgment, in conjunction with all other eligibility requirements under Missouri law. Option C. Deny the permit application based on the sheriff's personal belief that individuals arrested for assault, regardless of the outcome, are inherently too risky to be entrusted with a concealed firearm. Option D. Issue the permit without further investigation, assuming that the dismissal of charges signifies the applicant's innocence and renders the past incident irrelevant to their current eligibility. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the circumstances surrounding the arrest, considering any available evidence or information that might indicate a propensity for violence or poor judgment, in conjunction with all other eligibility requirements under Missouri law. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's right to privacy with the legitimate need for law enforcement to access information relevant to public safety and the permitting process. The applicant's past behavior, while not resulting in a conviction, raises a flag that requires careful consideration within the framework of Missouri's concealed carry laws. The core tension lies in determining what constitutes sufficient grounds to deny a permit based on past conduct, without infringing on rights or engaging in arbitrary decision-making. The correct approach involves a thorough, individualized review of the applicant's history, focusing on whether the past incident, even without a conviction, demonstrates a pattern of behavior that would pose a risk to public safety if the individual were to carry a concealed firearm. This approach aligns with Missouri Revised Statutes Chapter 571, which outlines the grounds for permit denial. Specifically, it requires the sheriff to consider whether the applicant has demonstrated poor judgment or a propensity for violence that would make them a danger. This involves looking beyond mere arrests to the totality of circumstances surrounding the incident and any other relevant information. The sheriff must apply the law judiciously, ensuring that any denial is based on objective criteria and not on speculation or bias. An incorrect approach would be to automatically deny the permit solely because of the arrest, regardless of the outcome or the specific details of the incident. This fails to adhere to the statutory requirement of assessing the applicant's overall fitness and could be seen as an arbitrary denial, potentially violating the applicant's rights. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the incident entirely, assuming that the lack of a conviction means it is irrelevant. This would be a failure to exercise due diligence in assessing potential risks to public safety, as the underlying behavior that led to the arrest might still be indicative of poor judgment or a propensity for violence. Finally, an approach that relies on personal feelings or assumptions about the applicant based on the arrest, rather than a factual assessment of the incident and its implications for carrying a concealed weapon, is also professionally unacceptable and ethically unsound. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective assessment, adherence to statutory requirements, and a commitment to due process. This involves gathering all relevant information, carefully evaluating it against the legal criteria for permit issuance or denial, and documenting the rationale for the decision thoroughly. When in doubt, seeking legal counsel or consulting with experienced colleagues can help ensure that decisions are fair, lawful, and defensible. Question 4. The efficiency study reveals that current training materials for Missouri Concealed Carry Permit (CCP) holders may not adequately address the legal distinctions regarding the duty to retreat when faced with a threat. Which of the following best reflects the legal standard in Missouri for a CCP holder using deadly force in self-defense? Option A. A permit holder is justified in using deadly force only if they have exhausted all possible avenues of escape and have no other option to avoid harm. Option B. Any use of a firearm by a CCP holder during a confrontation is permissible as long as they possess a valid permit, as the permit itself signifies a right to defend oneself with lethal force. Option C. A permit holder must always attempt to de-escalate the situation or retreat if possible, even if they are in their own home and facing an immediate threat of serious bodily harm. Option D. A permit holder is justified in using deadly force if they reasonably believe it is necessary to prevent imminent death or serious physical injury to themselves or another, and they are not required to retreat if they are in a place they have a legal right to be. The correct answer is D. A permit holder is justified in using deadly force if they reasonably believe it is necessary to prevent imminent death or serious physical injury to themselves or another, and they are not required to retreat if they are in a place they have a legal right to be. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a potential need to update the training materials for Missouri Concealed Carry Permit (CCP) holders regarding the legal nuances of self-defense scenarios. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the right to self-defense with the strict legal boundaries established by Missouri law, particularly concerning the duty to retreat and the permissible use of force. Misinterpreting these laws can lead to severe legal consequences for permit holders, even if their actions were intended to be defensive. The best approach involves accurately reflecting Missouri's legal framework on self-defense, emphasizing that a person is justified in using deadly force when they reasonably believe such force is necessary to prevent imminent death or serious physical injury to themselves or another person, and that they are not required to retreat when in a place they have a legal right to be. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with Missouri Revised Statute Section 563.031, which outlines the justifiable use of force, including deadly force, and the Castle Doctrine, which removes the duty to retreat in one's home or dwelling. Providing clear, legally accurate information is paramount to ensuring permit holders understand their rights and responsibilities under Missouri law, thereby promoting responsible firearm ownership and adherence to legal statutes. An incorrect approach would be to suggest that a permit holder must always attempt to de-escalate or retreat, even when facing an imminent threat of serious bodily harm in a location where they have a legal right to be. This fails to acknowledge Missouri's statutory provisions that remove the duty to retreat under such circumstances, and could lead permit holders to believe they have a legal obligation to retreat when the law does not require it, potentially placing them in greater danger or leading to legal repercussions if they are harmed while attempting to retreat unnecessarily. Another incorrect approach would be to imply that any use of a firearm in a confrontation, regardless of the circumstances, is permissible for a CCP holder. This ignores the critical element of reasonable belief of imminent danger and the proportionality of force required by Missouri law. It oversimplifies the legal standard and could encourage reckless behavior, which is contrary to the responsible and lawful use of a concealed firearm. A professional decision-making process for updating training materials should involve consulting current Missouri statutes and case law, seeking input from legal experts specializing in firearm law in Missouri, and prioritizing clarity and accuracy in all educational content. The focus should always be on empowering permit holders with precise legal knowledge to make informed decisions in potentially dangerous situations, ensuring their actions are both lawful and justifiable under Missouri's specific legal framework. Question 5. Market research demonstrates that many individuals who obtain a concealed carry permit, CCP, in Missouri may not fully grasp the extent of their carrying privileges and restrictions. Considering Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 571, which of the following best describes the legal understanding of carrying a concealed firearm with a valid CCP? Option A. A CCP allows an individual to carry a concealed firearm statewide, but with specific statutory prohibitions regarding certain locations such as schools, courthouses, and establishments where alcohol is sold for consumption on the premises. Option B. The primary determinant of where a CCP holder can carry a firearm is the discretion of individual property owners, overriding any state-mandated location restrictions. Option C. A CCP grants the unrestricted right to carry a concealed firearm in any public or private establishment within Missouri, provided the firearm remains concealed. Option D. If a firearm is carried concealed, it is legally permissible to carry it in all locations within Missouri, regardless of any posted signage or statutory restrictions. The correct answer is A. A CCP allows an individual to carry a concealed firearm statewide, but with specific statutory prohibitions regarding certain locations such as schools, courthouses, and establishments where alcohol is sold for consumption on the premises. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed firearm in Missouri. Misinterpreting or disregarding the nuances of Missouri concealed carry laws can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of the permit. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions are compliant with Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 571. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves understanding that Missouri law, specifically RSMO 571.030, outlines specific locations where carrying a concealed firearm is prohibited, even with a valid permit. This approach prioritizes adherence to the law by recognizing that a permit does not grant unrestricted carrying privileges. It acknowledges that certain premises, such as schools, courthouses, and establishments where alcohol is sold for consumption on the premises, are off-limits. This is correct because it directly reflects the statutory limitations placed upon permit holders, ensuring legal compliance and responsible firearm ownership. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that a concealed carry permit, CCP, grants the right to carry a firearm in any location within Missouri. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of the law. Missouri law explicitly lists prohibited locations, and a permit holder is responsible for knowing and abiding by these restrictions. Failure to do so constitutes a violation of RSMO 571-030. Another incorrect approach is to believe that if a firearm is concealed, it is permissible to carry it anywhere. Concealment is a condition for carrying under the permit, but it does not override the location-specific prohibitions. The law focuses on both the act of carrying and the location where the carrying occurs. A further incorrect approach is to rely solely on the discretion of property owners to grant or deny entry with a concealed firearm, without first understanding the statutory prohibitions. While property owners may have additional rights to restrict firearms, the permit holder's primary obligation is to know and follow the state-mandated prohibitions regardless of individual property owner policies, as per RSMO 571-030. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and informed approach to firearm laws. This involves thoroughly studying the Missouri revised statutes pertaining to concealed carry, particularly RSMO 571-030, and staying updated on any legislative changes. Before carrying a concealed firearm, individuals should mentally review the list of prohibited locations and consider the specific environment they are entering. If there is any doubt about the legality of carrying in a particular location, the safest and most professional course of action is to leave the firearm secured elsewhere. This decision-making process prioritizes legal compliance and public safety above personal convenience or assumption. Question 6. Market research demonstrates a growing interest among Missouri residents in obtaining a concealed carry permit, CCP. Considering the legal framework governing concealed carry in Missouri, which of the following actions best reflects a responsible and legally compliant approach for a CCP holder when navigating public spaces? Option A. Believing that a CCP holder is exempt from penalties if they are unaware of the specific legal restrictions for carrying a concealed firearm in certain Missouri locations. Option B. Assuming that a valid Missouri CCP grants the right to carry a concealed firearm in all public areas without needing to verify specific location restrictions. Option C. Relying on personal assessment of potential threats to decide whether carrying a concealed firearm is permissible in a given location, irrespective of statutory prohibitions. Option D. Proactively researching and adhering to Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 571, which outlines specific locations where carrying a concealed firearm is prohibited, even with a valid CCP. The correct answer is D. Proactively researching and adhering to Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 571, which outlines specific locations where carrying a concealed firearm is prohibited, even with a valid CCP. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed firearm in Missouri. The core of the challenge lies in understanding the nuances of Missouri's concealed carry laws, particularly concerning the permissible locations for carrying a firearm and the specific prohibitions that apply. Even when possessing a valid concealed carry permit, CCP, misinterpreting these laws can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of the CCP. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with all applicable statutes. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 571, specifically concerning the places where a concealed firearm may not be carried, even with a valid CCP. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and public safety by recognizing that a CCP does not grant unrestricted carrying privileges. Missouri law explicitly prohibits carrying a concealed firearm into certain locations, such as schools, courthouses, and law enforcement facilities, regardless of permit status. Therefore, the correct approach is to proactively identify and avoid these prohibited areas, ensuring that one's actions are always within the bounds of the law. This demonstrates a commitment to responsible gun ownership and respect for legal restrictions designed to maintain public order and safety. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a valid Missouri CCP automatically permits carrying a concealed firearm in all public places without exception. This fundamentally misunderstands the limitations of the permit, which are clearly defined in Missouri law. Such an assumption disregards specific statutory prohibitions and could lead to illegal possession of a firearm in a prohibited location, resulting in criminal penalties and potential CCP revocation. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on personal judgment or perceived threats to determine whether carrying a concealed firearm is appropriate in a given location, without consulting Missouri's specific legal restrictions. While situational awareness is important for self-defense, it does not supersede the explicit legal framework governing concealed carry. This approach risks violating Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 571, by entering a prohibited area based on subjective criteria rather than objective legal mandates. A third incorrect approach is to believe that ignorance of specific prohibited locations is an acceptable defense for carrying a concealed firearm in such a place. Missouri law places the responsibility on the permit holder to be aware of and comply with all restrictions. Claiming ignorance does not absolve an individual of their legal duty to know and follow the law, and it can lead to severe legal repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Missouri who are considering carrying a concealed firearm should adopt a proactive and informed approach. This involves not only obtaining a CCP, but also dedicating time to thoroughly study and understand Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 571, particularly the sections detailing prohibited locations and circumstances for carrying a concealed firearm. Regular review of these statutes is advisable, as laws can change. Before entering any new location, especially those that might be sensitive or regulated, a responsible permit holder should make a conscious effort to ascertain whether carrying a concealed firearm is legally permissible. This due diligence ensures compliance, promotes public safety, and upholds the integrity of the concealed carry privilege. Question 7. Market research demonstrates that individuals carrying concealed firearms in Missouri may encounter various stressful situations. Considering the legal framework of Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 571, which of the following actions best reflects the legally permissible and ethically responsible response when an individual with a concealed carry permit, CCP, is confronted by an aggressive individual who is verbally threatening but not physically assaulting them? Option A. Engage in a verbal argument to de-escalate the situation by asserting your rights as a CCP holder. Option B. Display the concealed firearm to deter the aggressive individual and signal that you are armed. Option C. Use the concealed firearm to physically push the aggressive individual away, thereby ending the confrontation. Option D. Maintain situational awareness. Avoid escalating the confrontation, and if necessary, create distance or seek assistance from law enforcement, only considering the use of the concealed firearm if there is an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm. The correct answer is D. Maintain situational awareness, avoid escalating the confrontation, and if necessary, create distance or seek assistance from law enforcement, only considering the use of the concealed firearm if there is an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed firearm in Missouri. The core of the challenge lies in understanding the nuances of Missouri law regarding the permissible use of deadly force and the specific circumstances under which a concealed firearm can be legally brandished or discharged. Misinterpreting these laws can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of a concealed carry permit, CCP. Careful judgment is required to ensure actions align with legal statutes and ethical considerations of firearm safety and responsible carry. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Missouri Revised Statutes, Chapter 571, specifically concerning the lawful carrying and use of a concealed firearm. This includes recognizing that a CCP does not grant a license to use a firearm in any situation, but rather permits concealed carry under specific conditions. The lawful use of a concealed firearm is governed by Missouri's self-defense laws, which generally require an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm to oneself or another, and that the individual reasonably believes such force is necessary to prevent that harm. Furthermore, the law emphasizes that the firearm should only be used as a last resort when other means of escape or de-escalation are not reasonably available or effective. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and responsible decision-making, ensuring that any action taken with a concealed firearm is justifiable under Missouri law and aligns with the ethical principles of minimizing harm and using force only when absolutely necessary. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that possessing a CCP automatically grants the right to display or use a firearm to intimidate or deter someone, even if the individual feels threatened, but not in imminent danger of serious harm. This fails to recognize that Missouri law requires a reasonable belief of imminent death or serious bodily harm to justify the use of deadly force. Displaying a firearm without meeting this threshold could be construed as unlawful brandishing or assault. Another incorrect approach is to believe that a concealed firearm can be used to defend property, such as a vehicle or personal belongings, without a direct threat to life or limb. Missouri law generally does not permit the use of deadly force solely for the protection of property. This approach violates the principle that deadly force is reserved for situations where human life is at stake. A third incorrect approach is to rely on personal feelings of unease or a general sense of being threatened without an objective, reasonable belief of imminent danger. This subjective interpretation of threat, without a concrete and immediate danger of death or serious bodily harm, does not meet the legal standard for justifiable use of deadly force in Missouri. This approach risks escalating a situation unnecessarily and potentially leading to unlawful use of force. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal knowledge and ethical responsibility. This involves 1. Understanding the specific statutes governing concealed carry and the use of force in Missouri. 2. Continuously educating oneself on legal updates and best practices for responsible firearm ownership and carry. 3. Practicing situational awareness to identify and avoid potential threats before they escalate. 4. Employing de-escalation techniques whenever possible. 5. If a threat is imminent and unavoidable, assessing the situation against the legal standards for self-defense, ensuring that the use of force is a last resort and proportionate to the threat. 6. Recognizing that the decision to use a firearm carries significant legal and ethical weight, and that actions will be scrutinized under the law. Question 8. Market research demonstrates that individuals seeking to renew their Missouri Concealed Carry Permit, CCP, often have questions regarding their responsibilities during routine interactions with law enforcement. Considering Missouri Revised Statutes Chapter 571, which of the following actions best reflects the legally required and professionally responsible conduct for a CCP holder during a lawful traffic stop? Option A. Only disclose your concealed firearm if you feel threatened or believe the situation might escalate. Option B. Wait for the law enforcement officer to ask if you are carrying any weapons before disclosing your concealed firearm. Option C. Assume that because you have a valid CCP, you are not required to disclose your firearm unless specifically asked about it. Option D. Immediately and verbally inform the law enforcement officer that you are in possession of a concealed firearm. The correct answer is D. Immediately and verbally inform the law enforcement officer that you are in possession of a concealed firearm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance their right to self-defense with the legal obligations and responsibilities associated with carrying a concealed firearm in Missouri. The core of the challenge lies in understanding the nuances of Missouri's concealed carry laws, particularly regarding the permissible locations for carrying a firearm and the requirement to inform law enforcement during a traffic stop. Misinterpreting these laws can lead to serious legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of a concealed carry permit, CCP. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with all applicable statutes and to act responsibly in potentially stressful situations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively understanding and adhering to Missouri Revised Statutes Chapter 571, specifically concerning concealed carry. This includes being aware of the locations where carrying a concealed firearm is prohibited, e.g., schools, courthouses, federal buildings, and understanding the legal requirement to inform a law enforcement officer that you are in possession of a concealed firearm during a lawful traffic stop. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and responsible firearm ownership, minimizing the risk of unintentional violations. By knowing the law, an individual can confidently and legally exercise their Second Amendment rights while respecting the authority of law enforcement and public safety. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that possessing a valid CCP grants unrestricted carrying privileges in all public spaces. This ignores specific statutory prohibitions outlined in Missouri law regarding certain locations where firearms are not permitted, even with a permit. Failure to recognize and respect these limitations constitutes a direct violation of Missouri statutes and can result in criminal charges. Another incorrect approach is to believe that informing law enforcement about a concealed firearm during a traffic stop is optional or dependent on the officer's request. Missouri law explicitly requires individuals to inform a law enforcement officer of their possession of a concealed firearm during a lawful traffic stop. Failing to do so is a violation of the statute and can lead to legal repercussions. A further incorrect approach is to rely on informal advice or assumptions about concealed carry laws rather than consulting the official Missouri revised statutes. This can lead to misinformation and a misunderstanding of legal requirements, potentially resulting in unintentional violations. Professional responsibility demands seeking accurate, legally sound information. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a proactive and informed approach to concealed carry. This involves thoroughly researching and understanding the specific laws of Missouri pertaining to concealed carry permits, including prohibited locations and interaction protocols with law enforcement. A decision-making framework should prioritize legal compliance, responsible behavior, and the safety of oneself and others. When encountering a law enforcement officer, the professional approach is to immediately and clearly inform them of the presence of a concealed firearm, as mandated by Missouri law, and to follow their instructions calmly and respectfully. Question 9. The audit findings indicate a potential undercollection of fees related to firearm transfers processed by a licensed dealer in Missouri. The auditor has provided a log showing 475 firearm transfers were completed during the last quarter. The statutory fee for the background check associated with each transfer, as per Missouri Revised Statutes Chapter 571, is $10,000. The total amount collected and deposited for these background checks was $4,500. What is the percentage difference between the actual collected amount and the expected amount based on the statutory fee? Option A. The actual collected amount is approximately 26% more than the expected amount. Option B. The actual collected amount is approximately 500% more than the expected amount. Option C. The actual collected amount is approximately 26% less than the expected amount. Option D. The actual collected amount is approximately 10% less than the expected amount. The correct answer is C. The actual collected amount is approximately 26% less than the expected amount. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential discrepancy in the calculation of fees related to firearm transfers, which is a critical area for compliance under Missouri law. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires not only an understanding of Missouri's concealed carry permit (CCP) regulations, but also the ability to accurately apply fee structures and potentially identify errors in record keeping. The auditor's concern highlights the importance of meticulous financial management and adherence to statutory fee requirements to avoid violations. The correct approach involves a precise calculation of the statutory fees for firearm transfers as outlined in Missouri Revised Statutes, Rs. Mo. Chapter 571. Specifically, the auditor is questioning the total revenue collected versus the number of transfers processed. The correct method requires multiplying the number of completed transfers by the applicable statutory fee per transfer. For example, if the statutory fee for a background check associated with a firearm transfer is $10,000 and there were 500 transfers, the expected revenue from this specific fee would be $5,000. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the legal mandate to collect specific fees for services rendered, ensuring that all required revenue is accounted for and remitted according to state law. Accurate calculation prevents undercharging, which could lead to a shortfall in state revenue, or overcharging, which could result in a violation of fee regulations. An incorrect approach would be to estimate the total fees collected based on a general average, without performing a detailed calculation for each transfer type or period. This is professionally unacceptable because it lacks the precision required by law and can mask actual discrepancies. Estimating can lead to significant under- or overstatements of collected fees, failing to meet the audit's objective of verifying accurate financial reporting. Another incorrect approach would be to simply rely on the total amount deposited in the bank without reconciling it against the number of transfers and the specific statutory fees. This fails to address the root cause of the auditor's concern, which is the accuracy of the fee calculation itself, not just the final deposit amount. It ignores the possibility that the deposited amount might be incorrect due to calculation errors. A third incorrect approach would be to assume the previous year's fee collection data is still accurate without re-evaluating it against the current number of transfers and any potential changes in statutory fees. This is a failure to adapt to current operational data and regulatory requirements. The professional decision-making process in such a situation should involve 1. Clearly understanding the auditor's specific concern regarding fee calculations. 2. Accessing and reviewing the relevant Missouri statutes, RSMO Chapter 571, pertaining to firearm transfer fees. 3. Obtaining detailed records of all firearm transfers processed during the audit period. 4. Performing a precise, line-by-line calculation of the expected fees based on the number of transfers and the statutory rates. 5. Comparing the calculated expected revenue with the actual collected revenue and investigating any variances. 6. Documenting the entire process and findings for the auditor. Question 10. Regulatory review indicates that a legally permitted concealed carry holder in Missouri is experiencing verbal aggression from another individual in a public place. The aggressor is not physically touching the permit holder and is not displaying any weapon, but is shouting insults and making aggressive gestures. What is the most appropriate course of action for the concealed carry permit holder? Option A. Immediately draw the concealed firearm and point it at the verbally aggressive individual to assert dominance and deter further aggression. Option B. Ignore the verbal aggression completely and make no effort to assess the situation or ensure personal safety. Option C. Maintain situational awareness, attempt to de-escalate or disengage if safe, and keep the firearm concealed unless an immediate threat of death or serious bodily harm arises. Option D. Loudly announce that they are legally carrying a concealed firearm and demand the aggressor cease their behavior. The correct answer is C. Maintain situational awareness, attempt to de-escalate or disengage if safe, and keep the firearm concealed unless an immediate threat of death or serious bodily harm arises. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the nuances of Missouri's concealed carry laws in a situation where a perceived threat might lead to an impulsive reaction. The core difficulty lies in distinguishing between a lawful exercise of self-defense and an unlawful brandishing of a firearm, especially when the individual is legally carrying concealed. Careful judgment is required to ensure actions remain within the bounds of Missouri law and ethical firearm handling principles. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves maintaining situational awareness and de-escalating the situation without resorting to the display of a firearm, unless absolutely necessary for immediate self-defense against a credible threat of death or serious bodily harm. This approach prioritizes personal safety and legal compliance by avoiding any action that could be construed as brandishing. Missouri law permits concealed carry, but it does not grant a license to threaten or intimidate. The legal justification for drawing a firearm is strictly limited to situations where there is an imminent danger of severe injury or death. Therefore, if the individual can safely retreat, or if the perceived threat does not meet the threshold for deadly force, the firearm should remain concealed. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to draw the concealed firearm and point it at the individual who is verbally aggressive but not physically threatening or displaying a weapon. This action constitutes unlawful brandishing under Missouri law, even if the individual possesses a valid concealed carry permit. The permit authorizes concealed carry, not the display of the weapon in a manner that creates fear or alarm without immediate justification. This approach fails to adhere to the strict legal standard for the use of deadly force and the prohibition against brandishing. Another incorrect approach is to immediately confront the verbally aggressive individual and loudly announce that they are legally carrying a concealed firearm. The individual may be legally carrying. This action is provocative and escalates the situation unnecessarily. It also risks drawing undue attention and potentially misinterpreting the intent of the permit holder, which could lead to unintended legal or safety consequences. This approach does not align with the principle of de-escalation and responsible firearm handling. A third incorrect approach is to ignore the verbal aggression entirely and make no attempt to assess the situation or ensure personal safety. While de-escalation is key, complete inaction in the face of escalating aggression could be dangerous. A responsible permit holder should remain aware of their surroundings and be prepared to take lawful action if the threat escalates to a point where self-defense is justified. This approach fails to balance de-escalation with the responsibility of personal safety. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes de-escalation and legal compliance. This involves 1. Situational assessment. Continuously evaluate the threat level. Is the aggression verbal only, or is there a physical component or display of a weapon? 2. Legal threshold. Understand that drawing a firearm is only permissible when facing an imminent threat of death or serious bodily harm. 3. De-escalation techniques. Attempt to disengage or verbally de-escalate if safe to do so. 4. Retreat. If a safe retreat is possible, it should be considered before any defensive action. 5. Lawful defense. Only if all other options are exhausted and the threat meets the legal standard for deadly force should a firearm be drawn and used. Question 11. Performance analysis shows that a lawful concealed carry permit holder in Missouri is stopped by a law enforcement officer for a minor traffic infraction. The officer approaches the vehicle. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the permit holder to take? Option A. Remain silent about the concealed firearm and only present the permit if the officer specifically asks about weapons. Option B. Immediately inform the officer that you are carrying a concealed firearm and present your Missouri concealed carry permit. Option C. Immediately draw the firearm to present the concealed carry permit to the officer. Option D. Attempt to conceal the firearm further or leave the scene without interacting with the officer. The correct answer is B. Immediately inform the officer that you are carrying a concealed firearm and present your Missouri concealed carry permit. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the nuances of Missouri's concealed carry laws while also considering the ethical implications of their actions in a public space. The core challenge lies in balancing the legal right to carry a concealed firearm with the responsibility to act in a manner that does not create unnecessary alarm or violate public order, especially when encountering law enforcement. Misinterpreting or misapplying the law can lead to serious legal consequences and compromise public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves immediate and clear communication with the law enforcement officer, informing them of the presence of the concealed firearm, and presenting the Missouri Concealed Carry Permit, CCP. This approach is correct because Missouri law, specifically RSMO 571-030, outlines the requirements for carrying a concealed firearm and the procedures to follow when encountering law enforcement. By proactively disclosing the firearm and presenting the permit, the individual demonstrates compliance with the law and fosters transparency, which is crucial for de-escalating potential misunderstandings and ensuring the safety of both the individual and the officer. This aligns with the ethical principle of responsible gun ownership and cooperation with law enforcement. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to remain silent about the concealed firearm and only present the CCP if specifically asked. This is professionally unacceptable because Missouri law requires an individual to inform a law enforcement officer, upon being requested to do so, that the person is carrying a concealed firearm. Failing to do so, even if the permit is eventually produced, can be a violation of RSMO 571-030. This approach risks creating a situation where the officer may feel surprised or threatened, potentially leading to a more confrontational encounter. Another incorrect approach is to immediately draw the firearm to present the CCP. This is a severe regulatory and ethical failure. Missouri law does not mandate or permit drawing a concealed firearm when encountering law enforcement for the purpose of presenting a permit. Such an action would likely be perceived as a threat, leading to immediate escalation and potentially dangerous consequences, violating principles of responsible firearm handling and public safety. A further incorrect approach is to attempt to conceal the firearm further or leave the scene without interacting with the officer. This is also professionally unacceptable. Concealing the firearm further when interacting with law enforcement is a direct contravention of the disclosure requirement under ARSMO 571-030. Attempting to leave the scene without lawful cause could be interpreted as evading law enforcement, leading to additional legal complications and undermining the principles of lawful conduct. Professional reasoning. Professionals encountering law enforcement while lawfully carrying a concealed firearm in Missouri should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, compliance, and de-escalation. This involves understanding the specific disclosure requirements mandated by ARSMO 571-030. The process should be: 1. Remain calm and compliant. 2. Upon being approached by law enforcement, and if the officer indicates they are aware of or suspect a firearm, or if the officer requests information, immediately and verbally inform the officer that you are carrying a concealed firearm and present your Missouri concealed carry permit. 3. Keep hands visible and follow all lawful instructions from the officer. This framework ensures adherence to legal obligations and promotes a safe and professional interaction. Question 12. The assessment process reveals a scenario where a Missouri Concealed Carry Permit (CCP) holder is lawfully carrying a concealed firearm and is subsequently stopped by a law enforcement officer for a minor traffic infraction. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant course of action for the permit holder in this situation? Option A. Calmly inform the officer of the concealed firearm and present the CCP and a valid government-issued photo identification when requested. Option B. Remain silent about the presence of the concealed firearm, hoping the officer does not discover it during the stop. Option C. Refuse to acknowledge the presence of the firearm or to present the CCP and identification, asserting the right to carry without disclosure. Option D. Immediately reach for the concealed firearm or the CCP before the officer has a chance to ask for it. The correct answer is A. Calmly inform the officer of the concealed firearm and present the CCP and a valid government-issued photo identification when requested. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge for Missouri Concealed Carry Permit (CCP) holders, navigating the nuances of lawful firearm possession in public spaces, particularly when encountering law enforcement. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an immediate, accurate understanding of legal obligations and rights, balancing the right to carry with the duty to cooperate with lawful police directives. Misinterpreting these obligations can lead to serious legal consequences, including arrest and revocation of the CCP. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance without compromising personal safety or constitutional rights. The best professional approach involves a calm, cooperative, and informative response. This means immediately informing the officer of the presence of the concealed firearm and presenting the CCP and a valid government-issued photo identification when requested. This approach is correct because Missouri law, specifically ARSMO 571-030 and related statutes, mandates that a person carrying a concealed firearm must have their CCP readily available and must display it to a law enforcement officer upon request. Furthermore, ethical considerations of responsible gun ownership dictate transparency and cooperation with law enforcement to de-escalate potential confrontations and ensure public safety. An incorrect approach would be to remain silent about the firearm, hoping the officer does not discover it. This is a regulatory failure, as it directly violates the statutory requirement to inform the officer and display the permit upon request. Ethically, it erodes trust and can be perceived as deceptive, potentially escalating the situation if the firearm is discovered later. Another incorrect approach would be to immediately reach for the firearm or the permit without being instructed to do so by the officer. This is a significant safety and regulatory failure. Reaching for a firearm or its associated permit without explicit instruction can be misinterpreted by the officer as a hostile action, leading to a dangerous escalation. Missouri law emphasizes displaying the permit asterisk upon request asterisk, not proactively or aggressively. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to refuse to acknowledge the presence of the firearm or to refuse to present the CCP and identification. This constitutes a direct violation of Missouri statutes governing concealed carry and would likely result in immediate legal repercussions, including potential arrest and charges related to unlawful firearm possession. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes immediate compliance with legal requirements while maintaining a calm and non-threatening demeanor. This involves understanding the specific statutes governing concealed carry in Missouri, particularly the duty to inform and display the permit. When interacting with law enforcement, the professional should remain still, keep hands visible, and respond truthfully and cooperatively to lawful commands, providing the requested documentation promptly. Question 13. Stakeholder feedback indicates a need for clearer understanding of firearm carry restrictions for Missouri concealed carry permit (CCP) holders in private establishments. A CCP holder is entering a privately owned retail store in Springfield, Missouri. The store has a clearly posted sign at its entrance stating "No firearms allowed." Based on Missouri law, what is the legally and ethically appropriate course of action for the CCP holder? Option A. Respect the posted signage and refrain from carrying the concealed firearm into the store. Option B. Ask other patrons if they have ever seen firearms carried in the store to gauge the enforcement of the policy. Option C. Carry the concealed firearm into the store, believing that the CCP overrides the private business's signage. Option D. Carry the concealed firearm into the store and only remove it if directly confronted by store management. The correct answer is A. Respect the posted signage and refrain from carrying the concealed firearm into the store. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the nuances of Missouri's concealed carry laws, specifically concerning the permissible locations for carrying a firearm. The challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying the statutory provisions to a real-world situation where a misunderstanding could lead to legal consequences. It demands a thorough understanding of the Missouri Revised Statutes, RSMO, related to concealed carry, particularly Chapter 571, and the ability to distinguish between prohibited and permitted locations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a direct and accurate interpretation of Missouri law. This means understanding that while carrying a concealed firearm is generally permitted for CCP holders, specific locations are explicitly prohibited by statute. The correct approach is to recognize that a private business, not otherwise designated as a prohibited location by statute, e.g., a school, courthouse, or polling place on election day, can legally restrict or prohibit firearms on its premises through signage or verbal notice. Missouri law, specifically RSMO 571, 107, outlines prohibited locations, but also allows private property owners to post signs prohibiting firearms. Therefore, adhering to the posted signage of a private business is the legally sound and ethically responsible action. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that having a CCP automatically grants the right to carry a concealed firearm in any private establishment, regardless of the owner's policies. This fails to acknowledge the property rights of business owners and the specific provisions within Missouri law that allow them to prohibit firearms on their premises. Another incorrect approach is to rely on hearsay or informal advice from other individuals about where firearms are permitted, rather than consulting the actual Missouri Revised Statutes. This can lead to misinterpretations and violations of the law. A further incorrect approach is to believe that the presence of a CCP negates any need to observe signage or heed verbal warnings from property owners regarding firearm restrictions. This demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the limitations placed on CCP holders by Missouri law. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes accurate legal knowledge and adherence to statutory requirements. This involves 1. Identifying the relevant jurisdiction and its specific laws, Missouri Concealed Carry Statutes, RSMO Chapter 571. 2. Understanding the rights and responsibilities of a CCP holder. 3. Recognizing the rights of private property owners to regulate conduct on their premises, including firearm possession, as permitted by law. 4. Consulting official legal resources, Missouri Revised Statutes, for definitive guidance, rather than relying on informal sources. 5. Acting in a manner that is both legally compliant and ethically responsible, respecting the rights of others and the established legal framework. Question 14. The risk matrix shows a heightened potential for civil unrest in a specific downtown area of St. Louis, Missouri, leading an individual to believe they might need to carry a concealed firearm for personal protection. This individual does not currently possess a Missouri Concealed Carry Permit, CCP. Considering the legal framework of Missouri, which of the following actions represents the most responsible and legally compliant approach? Option A. Carry a concealed firearm in the downtown area, believing that the perceived risk of civil unrest justifies immediate self-protection, even without a CCP. Option B. Obtain a Missouri Concealed Carry Permit (CCP) and familiarize oneself with all Missouri statutes regarding the lawful carrying of concealed firearms, including prohibited locations, before considering carrying a concealed firearm. Option C. Rely on anecdotal information from friends about what is permissible for carrying firearms in Missouri, and proceed with carrying a concealed firearm based on that understanding. Option D. Carry a concealed firearm in a prohibited location, such as a public library, within the downtown area, assuming that personal safety concerns override general restrictions. The correct answer is B. Obtain a Missouri Concealed Carry Permit, CCP, and familiarize oneself with all Missouri statutes regarding the lawful carrying of concealed firearms, including prohibited locations, before considering carrying a concealed firearm. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to balance the immediate perceived need for self-defense with the strict legal requirements for carrying a concealed firearm in Missouri. Misinterpreting or disregarding these legal requirements can lead to severe legal consequences, including criminal charges and the revocation of any concealed carry permit. The core of the challenge lies in understanding that the right to self-defense, while fundamental, is governed by specific statutory provisions. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough understanding and strict adherence to Missouri's concealed carry laws, specifically RSMO 571-030, which outlines the conditions under which a person may lawfully carry a concealed firearm. This approach prioritizes legal compliance by ensuring that the individual possesses a valid concealed carry permit, CCP, and is not in any of the prohibited locations or circumstances defined by Missouri statute. It recognizes that carrying a concealed firearm without meeting these prerequisites is a violation of the law, regardless of perceived threat. The ethical justification stems from respecting the rule of law and the public safety framework established by the state. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves assuming that a general sense of unease or a perceived potential threat is sufficient justification to carry a concealed firearm without a valid CCP. This fails to acknowledge that Missouri law requires a permit for concealed carry and does not permit carrying based solely on subjective feelings of insecurity. This approach violates RSMO 571-030 by circumventing the permit requirement. Another incorrect approach is to carry a concealed firearm in a location explicitly prohibited by Missouri law, such as a school or a federal building, even if the individual possesses a valid CCP. This demonstrates a failure to understand the scope of restrictions placed upon permit holders, as detailed in RSMO 571-107. Such an action constitutes a direct violation of statutory prohibitions, irrespective of the individual's intent or perceived threat level. A third incorrect approach is to rely on outdated or informal information regarding concealed carry laws, believing that certain actions are permissible when they are, in fact, illegal under current Missouri statutes. This highlights a failure in due diligence and a disregard for the importance of staying informed about the specific legal requirements for carrying a concealed weapon in Missouri. This can lead to unintentional violations of RSMO 571-030 and RSMO 571-107. Professional reasoning. Professionals facing situations where they consider carrying a concealed firearm should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal knowledge and compliance. This involves 1. Verifying current Missouri concealed carry permit requirements and eligibility criteria. 2. Familiarizing oneself with all prohibited locations and circumstances as defined by RSMO 571-107. 3. Understanding that subjective feelings of threat are not a substitute for legal authorization. 4. Seeking clarification from official sources or legal counsel if there is any doubt about the legality of carrying a firearm in a specific situation or location. This systematic approach ensures that actions are taken within the bounds of the law, thereby protecting oneself from legal repercussions and upholding public safety. Question 15. Operational review demonstrates that a Missouri concealed carry permit (CCP) holder is involved in a heated verbal argument in a public parking lot. The other individual is shouting aggressively and gesturing wildly, but is not physically approaching or making any direct physical threats. The CCP holder feels threatened by the aggressive demeanor. Considering Missouri law, what is the most appropriate course of action for the CCP holder? Option A. Remain calm, avoid further engagement, and if possible, disengage from the situation, only considering the use of the concealed firearm if the threat escalates to imminent serious physical injury or death. Option B. Brandish the concealed firearm to intimidate the aggressor and force them to leave the area. Option C. Immediately draw the concealed firearm to show the aggressor they are armed and to deter further verbal escalation. Option D. Engage in a shouting match with the aggressor to assert dominance and make them back down. The correct answer is A. Remain calm, avoid further engagement, and if possible, disengage from the situation, only considering the use of the concealed firearm if the threat escalates to imminent serious physical injury or death. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires an individual to navigate the nuances of Missouri's concealed carry laws while also considering the potential legal ramifications of their actions in a public space. The core of the challenge lies in understanding the scope of permissible actions when carrying a concealed firearm, particularly in situations that may involve perceived threats or altercations. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with Missouri statutes and to avoid actions that could be misconstrued or lead to legal trouble, even if the intent is self-defense. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves understanding and strictly adhering to Missouri Revised Statutes Chapter 571, specifically concerning the lawful carrying of a concealed firearm. This includes recognizing that, while Missouri law permits concealed carry for permit holders, it does not grant a license to engage in aggressive behavior or to use a firearm unless there is an immediate threat of serious physical injury or death. Therefore, the correct approach is to remain calm, de-escalate the situation if possible, and only consider the use of the concealed firearm as a last resort, strictly within the bounds of self-defense as defined by Missouri law. This aligns with the principle of responsible firearm ownership and the legal framework governing concealed carry in Missouri, which emphasizes lawful use and de-escalation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately drawing the concealed firearm upon perceiving a verbal threat. This fails to comply with Missouri law, which requires an imminent threat of serious physical injury or death to justify the use of deadly force. Drawing a weapon in response to a verbal altercation alone can be construed as an aggressive act and may lead to criminal charges, even for a permit holder. Another incorrect approach is to engage in a verbal argument with the individual, escalating the confrontation. While not directly involving the firearm, this behavior can create a volatile situation where the use of the firearm might become more likely, and it demonstrates a lack of judgment in de-escalating a potentially dangerous encounter. Missouri law expects permit holders to exercise discretion and avoid unnecessary confrontations. A third incorrect approach is to brandish the concealed firearm to intimidate the individual. This is explicitly prohibited under Missouri law and is considered unlawful use of a weapon. The purpose of a concealed carry permit is for self-defense, not for intimidation or to assert dominance. Such an action would negate any claim of self-defense and would likely result in severe legal penalties. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes de-escalation and adherence to legal statutes. This involves 1. Situational awareness, continuously assessing the environment and potential threats. 2. De-escalation techniques, employing verbal and non-verbal strategies to reduce tension and avoid confrontation. 3. Legal knowledge, possessing a thorough understanding of Missouri's concealed carry laws, including the specific circumstances under which force, including deadly force, is legally permissible. 4. Proportionality, ensuring any response is proportionate to the threat faced. 5. Last resort, viewing the use of a firearm as an absolute last resort when all other options have been exhausted, and there is an immediate, unavoidable threat to life or limb. Question 16. Quality control measures reveal that a Missouri resident, who has successfully completed a concealed carry course in another state and holds a valid concealed carry permit from that state, is seeking guidance on carrying a concealed firearm within Missouri. What is the most accurate and legally compliant advice to provide this individual regarding their concealed carry rights in Missouri? Option A. Recommend that the individual research Missouri's concealed carry laws online to determine their eligibility to carry a concealed firearm. Option B. Inform the individual that their valid out-of-state concealed carry permit is sufficient for them to carry a concealed firearm in Missouri, as Missouri has reciprocity agreements with most other states. Option C. Suggest that the individual can carry a concealed firearm in Missouri without a permit, as long as they are acting in lawful self-defense. Option D. Advise the individual that as a Missouri resident, they must obtain a valid Missouri Concealed Carry Permit, CCP, to legally carry a concealed firearm in Missouri, even though Missouri generally recognizes valid permits from other states for non-residents. Correct answer is D. Advise the individual that as a Missouri resident, they must obtain a valid Missouri Concealed Carry Permit, CCP, to legally carry a concealed firearm in Missouri, even though Missouri generally recognizes valid permits from other states for non-residents. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves a potential conflict between an individual's right to self-defense and the specific legal requirements for carrying a concealed firearm in Missouri. The challenge lies in accurately interpreting and applying Missouri's concealed carry laws, particularly concerning the validity of permits issued by other states when the individual is a Missouri resident. Misinterpreting these laws could lead to serious legal consequences for the individual and potential liability for the instructor. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with Missouri statutes and to provide accurate, legally sound advice. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice is to advise the individual that, while Missouri generally recognizes concealed carry permits from other states for non-residents, a Missouri resident must possess a valid Missouri Concealed Carry Permit, CCP, to legally carry a concealed firearm within Missouri. This approach is correct because Missouri Revised Statute Section 571, 107, 11A and Section 571, 101, 1 explicitly require a Missouri resident to obtain a Missouri CCP to carry a concealed firearm in the state, while reciprocity agreements allow non-residents with valid permits from their home states to carry concealed in Missouri. These provisions do not extend to Missouri residents who are otherwise required to obtain a Missouri permit. This approach prioritizes strict adherence to Missouri's statutory requirements for its residents, ensuring legal compliance and preventing the individual from unknowingly violating state law. Incorrect approach is analysis. Advising the individual that their valid out-of-state permit is sufficient for concealed carry in Missouri as a resident is a significant regulatory failure. This directly contradicts Missouri Revised Statute Section 571, 101, 1, which mandates that a Missouri resident must obtain a Missouri CCP. This approach creates a false sense of security and exposes the individual to potential arrest and prosecution for carrying a concealed weapon without a valid Missouri permit. Another incorrect approach would be to suggest that the individual can carry concealed without any permit, relying on general self-defense rights. This ignores the specific statutory requirements for concealed carry in Missouri, which are distinct from general self-defense principles. Finally, advising the individual to simply check the laws online without providing specific guidance based on Missouri statutes is professionally negligent. While self-education is important, an instructor has a duty to provide accurate and jurisdiction-specific legal information relevant to the training being offered. This vague advice fails to address the core legal requirement for a Missouri resident. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes jurisdictional specificity and statutory compliance. When faced with questions about concealed carry permits, the first step is to identify the individual's residency. If the individual is a resident of the jurisdiction where the training is taking place, in this case, Missouri, the primary focus must be on that jurisdiction's specific requirements for residents. This involves consulting the relevant statutes, e.g., Missouri Revised Statutes Chapter 571, to understand permit issuance, reciprocity, and any exceptions. If the individual is not a resident, then the focus shifts to understanding the reciprocity agreements between the jurisdiction and the individual's home state. In all cases, providing clear, accurate, and legally sound advice based on the applicable statutes is paramount. When in doubt, it is always better to err on the side of caution and advise the individual to seek clarification from official sources or legal counsel. Question 17. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a Missouri resident with a valid concealed carry permit, CCP, is planning to attend a local community event held at a public park. The event is scheduled to take place during the day, and the individual intends to carry their permitted concealed firearm. Considering Missouri law, which of the following actions best reflects responsible and legally compliant behavior for this permit holder? Option A. Carry the concealed firearm without concern, as a valid CCP generally permits carrying in most public outdoor spaces. Option B. Carry the concealed firearm in accordance with all restrictions outlined in Missouri's concealed carry statutes, ensuring it is not displayed and that the individual remains sober and aware of their surroundings. Option C. Carry the concealed firearm and be prepared to display it if they feel the situation warrants it to deter potential trouble. Option D. Carry the concealed firearm while consuming a moderate amount of alcohol, believing it will not impair their judgment. The correct answer is B. Carry the concealed firearm in accordance with all restrictions outlined in Missouri's concealed carry statutes, ensuring it is not displayed and that the individual remains sober and aware of their surroundings. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an individual to navigate the nuances of Missouri's concealed carry laws while also considering the ethical implications of their actions in a public setting. The presence of a firearm, even when legally carried, necessitates a heightened awareness of one's surroundings and a commitment to responsible behavior to avoid escalating potential conflicts or causing undue alarm. Misinterpreting or misapplying the law can lead to serious legal consequences and compromise public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves understanding and adhering strictly to Missouri's concealed carry statutes, specifically RSMO 571-030, which outlines the permissible locations for carrying a concealed firearm and the conditions under which carrying is prohibited. This approach prioritizes legal compliance and public safety by ensuring the individual is aware of and respects all restrictions, such as prohibitions in schools, courthouses, and polling places on election days, and the requirement to avoid carrying while under the influence of alcohol or controlled substances. It also encompasses the ethical responsibility to act in a manner that does not create a public disturbance or perceived threat. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a valid Missouri concealed carry permit, CCP, grants unrestricted carrying privileges in all public spaces. This fails to acknowledge the specific statutory limitations outlined in RSMO 571-030, such as prohibitions in certain government buildings, or the requirement to secure the firearm in a vehicle when entering a prohibited area. Another incorrect approach is to carry a concealed firearm while consuming alcohol, even if the individual believes they are not impaired. Missouri law explicitly prohibits carrying a concealed weapon while intoxicated, and this action directly violates RSMO 571-030. A third incorrect approach is to display the firearm unnecessarily or to use it to intimidate or assert authority in a non-life-threatening situation. This demonstrates a severe lack of judgment and a misunderstanding of the purpose of a CCP, which is for lawful self-defense, not for everyday intimidation or dispute resolution. Such actions can lead to criminal charges beyond those related to concealed carry violations. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with a thorough understanding of all applicable Missouri statutes and regulations pertaining to concealed carry. This includes regularly reviewing updates to the law and understanding the specific prohibitions and requirements. Before carrying a firearm, individuals should assess their intended destinations and activities to ensure compliance. They should also cultivate a mindset of de-escalation and responsible behavior, recognizing that carrying a firearm carries a significant responsibility to act with prudence and respect for the law and public safety. If there is any doubt about the legality of carrying in a particular location or situation, the safest and most professional course of action is to refrain from carrying the firearm in that instance. Question 18. Benchmark analysis indicates a Missouri concealed carry permit holder is considering entering a restaurant that serves alcohol. The permit holder is aware that Missouri law generally permits concealed carry in such establishments. However, the permit holder notices a sign at the entrance stating "No firearms allowed." What is the most prudent and legally compliant course of action for the permit holder? Option A. Politely inform the management that Missouri law allows concealed carry in their establishment and proceed to enter with the firearm. Option B. Conceal the firearm and enter the establishment, believing that as long as it remains concealed, no legal issue will arise. Option C. Carry the firearm concealed into the establishment, assuming state law permits it and the sign is not legally binding. Option D. Respect the posted signage and refrain from carrying the firearm into the establishment. The correct answer is D. Respect the posted signage and refrain from carrying the firearm into the establishment. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a common challenge for Missouri concealed carry permit holders, navigating the nuances of carrying a firearm in a private establishment that serves alcohol, particularly when the establishment's policy might differ from state law. The professional challenge lies in understanding the precise legal boundaries and respecting private property rights while adhering to one's concealed carry permit privileges. Misinterpreting these boundaries can lead to legal repercussions or unintended confrontations. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves understanding that while Missouri law generally permits concealed carry in establishments that serve alcohol, private property owners have the right to prohibit firearms on their premises. Therefore, the most appropriate action is to respect the posted signage or verbal directives from management. This approach aligns with Missouri Revised Statute Section 571(107), which outlines locations where concealed firearms are prohibited, including private property where the owner has provided notice. It also upholds the ethical principle of respecting private property rights. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that because Missouri law allows concealed carry in such establishments, one can carry a firearm regardless of the establishment's policy. This disregards the property owner's right to set rules for their premises and can lead to violations of Missouri Revised Statute Section 571(107), which allows for prohibition by private property owners. Another incorrect approach is to confront the establishment's management about their policy, arguing that state law supersedes their rules. This is a confrontational and unprofessional response that ignores the legal right of private property owners to regulate activities on their land. It also fails to recognize that, while state law permits carry, it does not mandate that private businesses must allow it. A third incorrect approach is to conceal the firearm and proceed to carry it into the establishment without regard for any posted signage or management's directives, believing that as long as it is concealed, no one will know. This is a deceptive and potentially illegal action. If discovered, it could lead to charges of trespassing or other offenses, and it undermines the responsible and lawful exercise of concealed carry privileges. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes understanding and respecting both state law and private property rights. This involves 1. Being aware of Missouri's concealed carry laws, including prohibited locations and exceptions. 2. Recognizing the right of private property owners to post prohibitions. 3. Observing for any posted signage or seeking clarification from management if unsure. And 4. Complying with lawful directives from property owners or their representatives. This proactive and respectful approach ensures legal compliance and promotes responsible firearm ownership. Question 19. Governance review demonstrates that a Missouri Concealed Carry Permit (CCP) applicant must demonstrate proficiency by firing a minimum of 50 rounds during the approved training course. The applicant's training record indicates they fired 20 rounds during marksmanship drills and 30 rounds during defensive shooting scenarios. What is the total number of rounds fired by the applicant during the required training course? Option A. The number of targets engaged. Option B. 50 rounds plus any personal practice rounds. Option C. Approximately 50 rounds. Option D. 50 rounds. The correct answer is D. 50 rounds. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge by requiring the applicant to accurately calculate the required ammunition expenditure based on specific training requirements and a given rate of fire, while also considering potential deviations. The challenge lies in applying the Missouri Concealed Carry Permit (CCP) syllabus requirements precisely and performing the mathematical calculations correctly under pressure, ensuring compliance with the spirit and letter of the training mandate. Miscalculation could lead to an incomplete or improperly documented training record, potentially impacting the permit application. Correct approach analysis. The best approach involves meticulously following the syllabus's specified minimum rounds for each training component and then calculating the total. The syllabus mandates a minimum of 50 rounds fired during the course. Determine the minimum expenditure. One simply sums the required rounds for each segment. If the applicant fired 20 rounds during the marksmanship drills and 30 rounds during the defensive shooting scenarios, the total rounds fired is /20 plus 30 equals 50 rounds. This directly meets the minimum requirement of 50 rounds as stipulated by the Missouri CCP syllabus. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply estimate the total rounds fired without a precise calculation. For instance, if an applicant states they fired around 50 rounds without detailing the breakdown, this lacks the specificity required to verify compliance with the syllabus's minimum. This approach fails to demonstrate a clear understanding and adherence to the quantitative requirements of the training. Another incorrect approach is to focus solely on the number of targets engaged rather than the number of rounds fired. The syllabus specifies a minimum number of rounds, not targets. Counting targets and assuming a round per target or an average number of rounds per target without adhering to the total round count would be a misinterpretation of the requirement. A further incorrect approach is to include rounds fired for practice outside of the official training course. The syllabus's round count pertains specifically to the supervised training session required for the CCP application. Rounds fired during personal practice, even if they exceed the minimum, do not fulfill the specific requirement of the course itself. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such calculations with diligence and precision. The decision-making process involves 1. Identifying the specific quantitative requirements from the governing syllabus, Missouri CCP in this case. 2. Breaking down the training into its constituent parts as defined by the syllabus. 3. Performing accurate mathematical calculations to sum the required components. 4. Documenting the calculation and the final result clearly to demonstrate compliance. When in doubt, always refer back to the official syllabus or seek clarification from the training provider.